me so excited. I've done a few of these DSC conferences, and this is the first one that we're doing in person since COVID. So we're so excited to be here. I want to welcome you guys again. But before we get started, I do want to add a little disclaimer that the opinions and comments that you'll hear today are our own, and they do not represent the opinions of our organization. Okay. And we know generative AI is proving to be a game changer across industries. You guys have heard it nonstop at this conference. And before we dive deep into these topics, I'm going to give everybody a chance to introduce themselves so that you know who you're hearing from. I'm Selma, Dogic, not Andy Cohen. I lead the Analytics Center of Excellence at Carter's. Taj, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to Gen AI. My name is Pirzada. I work for Nike. I run AI for North America. I have a number of teams that work for me, from data engineers, data scientists, machine learning engineers, Scrum wizards, product owners. So we think about building products, AI-based products. The other part of what I do is I deal with a lot of vendors as well to see how we can implement solutions in North America to kind of move the ball forward for us, right? Like adoption is key. So.
Hi, I'm Sean Sanders. I lead the data science function, global head of data science at Randstad SourceRight. We're a HR services and talent company. There are several different types of data that we use, either talent data, client data, or even market data, and we solve several different types of problems. So data science problems, say in compensation modeling or talent mobility. There's also problems in the digital twin space that we're looking into. In addition to integrating and using generative AI models. So thank you for being here.
You guys heard from me just prior to this session. My name is Navin, Sharma. I'm the VP of Product at Stardog. Stardog is an enterprise knowledge graph platform organization. We work with large enterprise organizations to help them collect, manage, organize their vast data and information knowledge bases. And for us, we've been actively engaged in utilizing the value of really Gen AI and large language models to help organizations fine-tune domain-specific data and information for their very specific needs. So pleasure to be here and excited to have this conversation with the rest of the team here.
Meet Patel. So I'm part of the Kellogg company. And we just had our spins that happened on Monday. So I'm officially part of Kellogg, which is literally a 2-day-old company. And so very excited to be part of a new snacking powerhouse. Aside from that, 15 plus years of experience in advanced analytics across multiple industries. And the last 5 years in CPG. And as part of the Kellogg, I lead our global data science team, largely supporting revenue growth management, marketing, supply chain, retail, and e-commerce. And pleased to speak with the folks here, and very excited about the conversation. Thank you.
All right, so it's obvious we have a lot of the industry leaders in generative AI and leaders across spaces. So I'm interested to hear from you guys. What is one of the most promising applications of generative AI that you've seen in your industries? Sean, I'd like you to hear from you first.
Sure. So there's several use cases that we've been looking at in the HR space, many of which is mainly integrating what we have in terms of our existing tools and using Gen AI in terms of as an interface for you to leverage that. So when you think of search and match applications, can you use generative AI to process that input and integrate that with our existing systems? So that's one use case. The other one is when you think of employers and talent, oftentimes your view of yourself is a job ad. That's the organization's advertisement for itself, a job description and an advertisement. And from a talent perspective, it's your resume. How do you use these tools in order to improve that and make an accurate and positive view of yourself for what you're trying to achieve? So there's many others, but integrating into the technology and also using the technology to improve the way we are perceived in an accurate and fair way are two main cases that we've been looking into.
What about in your industry? Because I feel like it's so different. What are some of the most promising applications that you've seen?
Yeah, I think based on where we are in the journey with generative AI, as 6 months ago when I spoke in a similar conference, we were actually concerned about how are we going to leverage ChatGPT, how are we going to think about the privacy, how are we going to think about the regulations. Now, 6 months has passed, and now, we can actually safely, at least augment a lot of the use cases. So from our case, it's all about driving operational efficiency to start with, and there are two domains that really comes to mind. One is sales, and the other one is marketing. So in sales, if you think about the sales team, they're developing a lot of the dashboards, and they wanted to generate a lot of the insights. With generative AI, you can seamlessly convert a lot of those insights into actionable insights, so you can take business decisions. And likewise, from a marketing standpoint, as we all know, you can really do all sorts of marketing use case by driving efficiencies, from content creation to really regulation within or monitoring the content, within the social medias of the world. So it's very fascinating.
Navin, what about your experience as a vendor? How does that differ from kind of what you perceive as the most promising application of generative AI?
Yeah, so again, we work with many different large organizations across industries. And if I have to kind of summarize the key proposition, really it's about helping and augmenting knowledge workers with information and data that is readily available to make their jobs better. A major soda manufacturer, I know we were talking backstage, working with Accenture, is utilizing our technology, for example, to capture tribal knowledge today that exists within their warehouse workers. Many of them are in retirement age, and so be able to both capture the tribal knowledge, but also drive more automation, so that those individuals that come behind them have the ability to interact with the data and gain insights in ways that doesn't really require them to invest in technical skills and technology skills, right? And so that in that sense, really, the idea of English becoming the next programming language, we're now driving that towards the mass use, frankly, for citizen data users. We see that in the space of pharma, where we're talking about drug discovery, so researchers and scientists that are working with large corpuses of research papers, clinical data, preclinical data, R&D data, drug interaction data. They want to be able to ask questions and interact with that information and do it in ways that you would expect, more natural language oriented. We're definitely seeing a lot of traction there. And then manufacturing, as I mentioned, supply chain is another area outside of the aspect of building this digital twin, where, especially now with COVID, that has been a major push by manufacturers to have their supply chain analysts not only connect up this knowledge of information that sits across the supply chain, but be able to ask questions and get answers quickly. And so that, combined with financial services and the operational risk side, we're already seeing a lot of good use cases coming forward.
Yeah. I know, I feel like we've heard a lot of the theme of generative AI helping your knowledge workers be more effective and efficient, right? So do their jobs faster, but also doing their jobs better. And that seems like the first kind of initial approach that organizations are taking. But we've also heard a lot about kind of the ethical implications of generative AI, and that these models are inherently biased. So I'm interested in hearing kind of what your approach has been to mitigating these ethical risks. Taj, what about you?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I give a lot of talks within the organization and otherwise around ethics in AI. And the reason for that is it's really obvious, right? So if you have biased data, your models will learn your bias, right, from the data. So I think about building ethical machines, right, which means that I want to be bias-free, I want to be ethical, which is again subjective. My idea of ethics might be different from your idea of ethics. But then there's the organizational approach as well. So we're always trying to bridge the gap between what the C-suite is thinking, like what are the boundaries, what do we want to do, what do we not want to do, and how does that filter all the way to that engineer that's sitting in, that code lab, writing code and saying, I need to produce this in the next 48 hours because I have a deadline to meet. So it's not always easy. one thing about LLMs, especially the ChatGPTs of the world, I don't think there's any way for us, as far as I know, and I could be wrong, obviously, it's one man's opinion, one person's opinion, that I don't know what's in the training set. So I don't know how much bias is included. Remember, LLMs are 100% predicting the next word in a sequence with some probability. If they're learning that from bad data, so then they're going to produce bad results. And they pass the Turing test. A Turing test is when you cannot tell a man or a person apart from an AI, right? So AI passes the test, passes off as a human, but it could be feeding you a lot of junk, and you have to have checks and balances in place. What those exactly are, I'm still trying to figure it out. I have not been able to effectively mitigate without all of us kind of talking about it and addressing it. But it is a big issue for me personally.
Yeah. Sean, what's been your approach in terms of mitigating ethics issues with generative AI?
Right. I think in many organizations it starts with having something of an AI principles in place, right? So that could include having a human in the loop, determining what use cases that you're comfortable looking into, and making a decision, is this something that's worth doing and aligns with our organization's beliefs? So it starts there. From there, then it really determines, how do you want your output to be used, which is also a use case component, but also what are the metrics and measurements you want to leverage to do that. Now, as we use generative AI and other types of technology, evaluation has gotten that much more difficult, right? When you're using it to assign these metrics in a more structured sense, then you can just calculate things. But now your input and your output are less deterministic. Things change. How do you monitor this drift? So it's just gotten that much more complex, which makes testing that much more important. So one thing we tried to do is really scrub our input, identify if there's bias coming into the input using log analysis, seeing what people use and how they found the feedback from the human on what a good output is, and in many cases restricting how users leverage the tool. One thing we have struggled with is users might just log on to an external third party and use that version versus an in-house version. So how do you convince your use of the in-house is more safe and ethical and is bringing a better positive force of good for society, right? We don't want to have negative consequences, right? So those are generally some of the ways in which you've looked into it.
It's interesting. So it sounds like having really strong principles at the forefront is important. I'm interested to hear kind of what your approach will be in terms of generative AI ethics as you're leading a newly formed 2-day-old company.
Yeah, absolutely. Although we are newly formed, a lot of the legacy still carries 117 years. So not quite nearly, but it's a new excitement and spirit for sure. I think there are a couple of things from an organizational standpoint as well that we got to think about from a legal and a privacy perspective, because the dynamic is changing so fast, so frequently that you have to take the entire legal privacy team, kind of like almost the operating council of AI, within the company, and make sure everybody's on board. So that way you don't really tackle that issue of biasness, right? Because you are already, as you are defining it, what are your criteria that a given company is comfortable with. So I think that's kind of like one thing to know. The other one on the other end is once you have already operationalized the AI, a lot of the times you're going to realize is that, well, I need to negate some of the things so that people are not really searching for those things, because that's kind of like you're getting into the whole model errors, outside of the model errors. So the AI was meant to serve purpose X, but then people are searching for Y, and then the model accuracy is really dropping significantly. So like, how do you really start controlling for that? And that at that time you probably may feel like that. Well, we're probably spending more time negating it versus really developing it, right? So I think it's a really a good balance that you have to really strike in order to really scale AI capability. And then of course the last piece is the change management piece, which is okay. Now you got this model. How are you going to really drive the adoption, and how are you going to really make sure that the end user is really comfortable using the model outputs as well? So.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think also like along those lines, right? So there are these ethical implications, but then there are also implications of the models just spitting out wrong information, right? It's misleading, sometimes it's inaccurate, and sometimes it comes in the form of very confident hallucinations that it makes it hard for the consumer to really kind of decipher, right? Is this accurate? Is this trustworthy? Navin, we heard on your keynote kind of the benefits of having a graph base, right, in terms of data democratization, making it shareable, accessible, accurate. So from your perspective, how do you guys kind of intend to approach these hallucinations to ensure that consumers are getting accurate information?
Yeah, look, these models are designed for inferring. The notion of inference, right? It's powerful, yet that's what produces a lot of the hallucinations as well. And so you have to, inside of an enterprise, move to be more factually accurate, and that starts with a good data foundation. Todd's talked about the idea that you feed in bad data and you'll get bad results, and that's absolutely true. Even in this sort of advanced stage that we're in with Gen AI, and so putting together the right data foundation is paramount. It's a prerequisite. There's no getting around that. And then more importantly, using that to control the specific domains. So there's already talk of small language models, right? There's domain specific. And so yes, you got the large language models. It has a good understanding of how to produce English language. But really for an enterprise, it boils down to what are the domains we want to unleash the various use cases. How do we get to the right data so the answers are factually accurate? And then more importantly, how do we make sure that from an ethical perspective, there's full traceability and trust and verification that follows so that you can actually explain away the answers that are getting produced, that you can trace that back to the model, the concepts, and what the source of the information was that generated the response, right? So that explainability element, I think, is going to be key for all of us to feel comfortable internally. But then as we as consumers start to get benefit of this and they want to ask the next question, how did you come to this conclusion? We should be able to trace that back to the source of the information.
That's interesting too, right? Because these are real-world implications that these models have. I mean, Sean, in your area, this could be a matter of somebody getting booted to the next round, right, in a job interview or like a life-changing job, right? So how do you guys at Randstad ensure that the output of these models are accurate?
It's difficult. I don't think it's a solved problem at this point. But what we do is we value testing, right, immensely. So, and this is not just for Gen AI. This is NI, machine learning in general, right? The same concepts of the issues from data quality, the input, data cleaning. All of these aspects have been issues for a very long time. Accuracy has been an issue for quite some time. The challenge is resolving those issues have become more difficult as it became more difficult to explain these models. So to your point, Navin, the ability to explain this data, to explain your results, to explain your input, to sift your data, ensure that the right information is going into your model is key. And there is going to be some information leakage. There's going to be some logic from A to B and B to C where B is not true that's going to go into the solution. But that's also where the human in the loop comes into play, and where you don't simply roll out something when it's not production ready. You have a pilot group where you get the feedback from the users and validate that with your data teams to ensure that you're again being a positive force for good. Because even if your quantitative metrics suggest that your approaches are doing a good thing, we still don't want to forget about the individuals, right? If one person is being adversely impacted, we want to improve things as best we can so we're not losing individuals in an unfair way.
That's interesting. Mid, do you have anything to add on how you guys approach data accuracy and reliability?
Both of them really summed it up well. I mean, it really is about the end customer user and really true validation to say, is the data really summarizing well? Because I think where we are in the whole generative AI journey at the moment is it really does a good job of descriptive analytics. So if you were to throw in a bunch of data and say, hey, summarize it for me, it would summarize it really well. Where I think it's really running into challenge is that you start creating the rules that if this, then this, so what, but this, kind of like, human brain can only handle 2 differentials, right? Sometimes 3, but at that point after that, you can't really handle it. So this is where we're not quite there yet, but I'm hoping, we'll probably get there fairly soon, given 6 months has gotten us this far. Hopefully.
Yeah, we're definitely in the revolution phase. Yes, please. I saw you nodding your head, and I wanted to ask.
I'm tired of nodding. I want to talk. So, just bear with me. One of the things that I was listening to all of us, and what none of us have mentioned is explainable AI, right? Remember that from a couple of years ago? I mean, it was like a big thing. Everybody needs to explain what's happening. Suddenly, I've realized that you come to LLMs, right? Generative AI. Everybody's forgotten the basics, right? Nobody wants to know how it came together except that it can do stuff for me. It can write my papers, it can write my code, it can do all these things. But nobody's truly able to explain how it's come together. So I think that has to be an important consideration. Some of you may know this already, but the rest of you, there's something called ground truth. That means I measure my model's performance against something that has already happened. And I check the accuracy. So for LLM, somebody recently told me that, hey, we would produce ground truth on like a paragraph of what we think it should answer, and then we will take an answer from an LLM and we'll try to compare the two. And it's not a perfect metric, but usually in any data science field, right, like AI just being a better approach to what is data science statistics, just understanding that accuracy still means something. And it's something that you guys have to question. How? Why? Is it something that you can explain? Because I assure you that your legal department will come and shut you guys down. Because they will not accept an argument from you saying, oh, well, it's built by this company and they're amazing, so we have to accept whatever they're saying. It's not going to happen. So be prepared to have that big argument and just go in with your metric, whatever it is, to evaluate what that explainable AI portion of that generative AI needs to be.
Yeah, and I think that's a good note too, because I think, right, when we were thinking about the most promising applications, it was always kind of human-centered, right? So how can we how can we help the knowledge worker do their job faster, better, right? And how can we ensure that they know when to trust the information that they get as an output of the models, and when they need to do a little bit more digging, right? So that's a really, really good point. I know that that's something that we've struggled with at Carter's. And another thing that we've been thinking a lot about has been kind of cybersecurity and the risks to privacy, especially when you're dealing with customer information. So I'm interested to hear kind of how you guys think that cybersecurity and privacy can be mitigated when implementing generative AI models. Taj, I see you nodding your head again, so I have to ask you.
Guilty. I think of like data privacy as just being a big issue. So number one, please don't take your organization's data and post it on the web. Just an open source model. Don't do it. 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 It's exactly what I tell my teams like all the time, right? Play with it with your own personal email on your personal laptop. You're putting your organization at risk, because what's going to happen is that data is going to get used, and rightfully so, because if I were providing that model, I would say, here, use it, but every time you ask me a question, I'm going to save that question, I'm going to use it for like training for the future. So in effect, what will happen is your data will end up making this model smarter that your competitors could potentially use. And, like I said, there are all kinds of risks, and even the ethics part of it is important, right? But the data is at risk. My company has been in negotiations with OpenAI for the past 6 months, and their legal team and our legal team cannot come to an agreement as to how do we have access for our employees, and yet that data not be used for the rest of the world. It's an easy agreement, right? Don't use it. They can't guarantee us that they won't use it. 6 months later, I don't have permission to use it internally. So we're depending on vendors to come and give us some kind of vendor partners, right? To give us some kind of proof And the proof is like, hey, your data is going to be secure. Like if it sits in Microsoft Azure, for example, Microsoft is guaranteeing that your data will not leave Microsoft to go and train some other models. And we will verify this. This is what they're claiming, and they're coming up with a lot of different solutions, different applications. But just be careful, err on the side of caution. Don't put your career at risk. Don't put your team's career at risk. Don't put your teams and your company and the leadership and the organization at risk, right? Proceed with caution. Use it on your personal laptop all you want. But when it comes to your company data, please, please, please protect it.
Sounds like we're having a lot of the same conversations with some of our vendors. Sean, what's the approach that you take in terms of cybersecurity?
Yeah, Taj hit on many different points. So do you share your data? And I'll extend as organization data. There's your personal data as an individual, and there's also your clients, right? A lot of times you use these models in order to service others, right, that you do business with. So you need to be aware of, what are the risks and implications of sharing it from that perspective. Now, in the security and privacy space, there are many approaches that exist for improving the security and privacy of your data, whether you're leveraging privacy models or like k-anonymity or other approaches, or if you're using anonymization and things of that nature. I think what's made it more difficult now is, A, there's less understanding of the data that's been used to train the baseline model, and two, the input and the output perspective. The input's unstructured now. Does that PII suppression that you use for the input, does it really work for many different use cases? Because there's templates that you can leverage, but there's also just understanding deviations from that and ensuring there's no data leakage. So at the moment, we're still in the exploratory phases to ensure that's safe, because we don't want to roll it out too quickly and risk adverse things happening to our clients and talent.
Did you have anything to add?
No.
You got to stop the head nodding, man.
We covered everything.
They're geniuses. And it sounds, right, like there are a lot of these risks and considerations taking place when thinking about implementing a generative AI model within your organization. But I'm kind of curious now, as a company that's doing that exploration, right, who's thinking about the opportunities that this poses, how should companies integrate generative AI into their processes, their business processes, and into their strategies? Now I see you nodding at your head. So
yeah, this is what I do pretty much, right? So how do we really create a value? I think that's really the question here, and it really boils down to is what are the use cases? Because I don't think you want to really just do generative AI because you have this applicability. You want to do it because it's going to provide a 10x more productivity or really, really significant ROI. And once you put the numbers to the work, right, you're going to realize there are multiple ways that you can prioritize a lot of these use cases. And then once you go through that, the bigger challenge is really the adoption, the scalability, and then how are you going to really further evolve these use cases. So in the sales example that I mentioned, that hey, you build the dashboards and you automate that, there's always more that needs to be done afterwards. How are you going to sustain it? How are you going to make sure that the drift stays the same, the model drifts? So the value creation, in other words, right, is that we are very early in the journey. I mean, if you were to put it in the baseball, right, we're not probably even in the base one yet. And as we can probably see this field evolving, there's probably going to be a lot more use cases that you can apply this to. But at the moment, with a lot of the descriptive heavy focus, as well as there's of course certain models that I've seen is actually doing more prescriptive piece as well, which is more exciting because now the model is getting more smarter, more reflective, more immediately, giving you the response that you need. So it's really all about feasibility. Where is the use case really highly prioritized within the organization? And there is the adoption for the use case, and then if there is, then it checks all the boxes, and I guess it's really a moonshot at that point.
Navin, I'm interested to hear from you, kind of as your from your perspective as a vendor to other companies, but also internally. How do you kind of approach integrating generative AI into your business processes and strategies?
yeah, so I don't want to call it a bias, but certainly a point of view we have is that best way to do that is to augment that with external knowledge bases that are pertinent to like the domain that you're trying to unleash inside the enterprise. And for us, knowledge graphs and knowledge graph capabilities represent the ability to encapsulate organizational knowledge in almost your data vocabulary for the enterprise data, and using that to then train models, and then embedding that, frankly, to processes that are more dependent on functions like search and findability, more usage internally first. And one of the ways we're a startup, one of the ways we've been working on training, fine-tuning our models, is we had everyone in the company submit 10 queries per domain so that we could generate this corpus of information, and everyone asked the question in their own style of asking questions, and we would measure how well we did and how well we performed. And so I suppose eating your own dog food is one way of doing it, and making sure that responses, the quality, the accuracy is being tracked, and more importantly, you can see the improvements over time. And then certainly, as a vendor, we're kind of taking this a step approach, right? The next step of evolution for us is an early access program. We invite folks to come in, hit the product platform hard, ask the questions they want to ask. And again, we obviously we have terms of service. Obviously, we're not abusing this, but we're trying to improve the models. So you got to take that very step approach before you open it up for the masses, right? And that's the risk that we want to.
Yeah, thank you. I can think of some applications that we're looking at in general. So GitHub Copilot, right? Everybody wanting to play with it, get the permission, test it with a set of engineers, right? Because that's the easiest way to test it. People closest to the code started doing that, and then part of change management for me was making sure that we ran a lot of training to make sure that people are comfortable, right? Like, are you comfortable using it? Because we cannot recognize the ROI if you're not going to use it effectively, and then we will measure the success. How did it make you more efficient? And what is efficiency a function of? Is it the time savings? But not really, because you may learn a whole new way of doing something, and it might take you longer, right? In the beginning, like you don't know how to write your searches and your queries. When you search Google, it's like a really wide search, and then the search becomes narrow because you become an expert at searching. So I think over time, it will become more efficient, and our teams will become more efficient. The other thing is on chatbots, but chatbots with intelligence. So when they give you a response, they sound more human-like, right? So that's another application of LLMs. The third thing, we have a lot of legacy code, right? That doesn't have comments, and it takes us multiple sprint cycles to even mess with it, right? Like a 4-hour job might take us like a week or 2 weeks. That's really inefficient. So really, LLMs can actually be used to train, to write out comments on your code. And then if you do that, you can make it searchable. You can also train it to say, hey, if you wrote a Fibonacci sequence, sorry to get geeky, but if you wrote a Fibonacci sequence and it's n plus 1 and you wrote an n minus 1, it should prompt you and say, hey, you made a mistake in writing your code. So these are some of the things that I'm looking at in terms of implementing within our work.
Okay, so we've heard a lot about ROI and taking that approach in terms of implementing, right, this across your business organizations. So we talked a lot about also kind of this being the revolution. I know, Navin, you called it Generation AI, not X or Y. So I'm interested to hear from you guys kind of what the most significant business implication of generative AI will be in the next 5 years.
I'll pass on this one.
You say it in your head. You have to answer.
Well, because I don't really know, right? If you had asked me 2 years ago if LLMs are going to be like this big thing, I'm not sure I would say yes. They're here to stay. The horses are the barn, like we know that. And it's also, how are people going to use this and leverage it to develop smart applications? I think that's where the future is. And again, proceed with caution. That's where I see the next.
So a lot of unknown and uncertainty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna follow that. It's really tough. It's really tough. I mean, when I just think of how far things have come in the last 2-3 years versus 5 years and 10 years, who would have thought word embeddings, 10 years ago would be where they are now and having the downstream impacts that they are. I think a few things are for certain. One, LLMs makes your lives easier. It adds a level of convenience to retrieving and getting knowledge, right, and summarizing data. And I don't think that's going away anytime soon. So I think it will change the way in which we interact with the machine, train people up, and how people leverage technology. Beyond that, there could be another technology that pops up in the next 6 months that folks are excited about, and our opinions can change very quickly. So, but I do think the interaction with the technology will be quite a bit different.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's the point of the digital revolution. It's evolving. It's changing so much. Navin, what are your thoughts? What is this going to look like in the next 5 years for us?
I think it's all around productivity. I think knowledge workers having the ability to augment their own creativity with, technologies like Gen AI will drive better collaboration opportunities. Augment their creativity with the creativity that gets generated through these large language model foundations that organizations will put in place. We already see that, like I said, in Google Workspaces. They're introducing Duet AI, and BI tools will have the ability to turn this around and generate SQL. We talked about augmenting it with support using Copilot for coding. Marketing will augment their skills with content they can generate. So it's all around productivity, it's all around collaboration, and it's all around creativity. I think that will be, from my perspective, the next 5 years be the most critical aspects.
Meet, what's your prediction for the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think just with predicting generative AI is like predicting weather, which is it going to rain or not, but at least we have some directional approach in terms of where it's going, but not necessarily at the same time. But I think, as I think about it, it's really productivity driven right now, right? Everybody wants the operational efficiency, but once we pass through that, I think it's truly going to become an operation, like a transformational. It's just like having a widgets in iPhones, right? You have the very domain-specific capability does the task for you, and that's where I think the whole piece where we have a blanket statement about productivity, but then as you think about like any sort of technological revolutions that has gone before us, has always been that highly customization solves one problem, and then once it creates solves one problem, then it's more about how do we solve collectively more problems within that particular sector or the domain. So I think that's kind of like where I see this play out as we evolve. But again, it's to be to be decided where this goes.
TBD. And with that, we'll close the panel because I know that we're the only thing standing between you and your lunch. So thank you guys so much for your time. We look forward to connecting with you guys outside of the stage. Thank you.
Thank you all for being
Thank
here.
you.